Welcome to Love and Abuse, the show about helping you identify poisonous communication and toxic behavior. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. That's why it's important that you learn to pinpoint manipulative and controlling behavior so that you keep your power and your sanity. I'm your host, Paul Coliani. Thanks for joining me. Welcome to Love and Abuse. All the information on this podcast is meant for educational purposes only. Always consult a professional for your mental health and well-being, and always pick your battles wisely. I think we know what that means now. We got to be careful who we pick our battles with. And today I'm going to talk about a message that somebody sent me. They're looking for information on identifying the behavioral patterns of someone that's been emotionally abused. They wrote, "The person I care for deeply was emotionally abused as a child, and I'm trying to learn how to support and understand her. Sometimes it seems like I am doing everything wrong, and then I realize I am triggering something that makes her think I am becoming the abuser. I quickly retreat from these situations, but I am also aware that she can become or quickly become the abuser, and that I am changing myself to fix her situation. I appreciate all the time you take to educate the online community, and thank you for being you." Wow, thank you so much for that last comment. And this is a great question, but I may not have the answer you're looking for, but I will give you my thoughts on this. Let me just go through what you said. You're looking at a person that you care for deeply who was emotionally abused as a child. So right off the bat, if this person was emotionally abused and she has unhealed wounds and unhealed trauma, she probably needs to talk to somebody about it. You probably already know that, but I'm just telling you this, telling you like it is. When you have unhealed trauma, unresolved emotional stuff, it's good to talk to somebody about it. Now, that could be a therapist, that could be a best friend, that could be you. I don't know. But it definitely needs to be discussed. And if it's not discussed, then where do you go from there? So it is possible to heal your own emotional wounds. It's doable. I mean, I've done it. Many people that listen to this show and my other show, The Overwhelmed Brain, are doing it. It's called self-help. We can do this. We can work on ourselves and do our best to heal ourselves. Not all of us can do this. Not all of us have the capability or the tools to do this. So that's why you reach out to others and you ask them or share with them or vent to them, whatever it takes, so that you get it out, because it stays in there. This stuff from childhood stays in there until it's healed, or at least the bad stuff. That doesn't mean everything needs to, quote, heal, but it might need to be processed. It might need to be released. Sometimes venting to somebody can do that. Sometimes just telling someone how bad your parents treated you, or your brother or your sister, or that really bad person that you had a romantic relationship with. Sometimes just venting and telling them all your emotions and your feelings and your thoughts, getting it all out, can be helpful. It is that pressure release valve. You open it up and just let the pressure out, because a lot of people will hold it in. They will swallow their anger. They will swallow their sadness. They will repress their thoughts, and they will suppress their emotions, which leads to depression quite often, and anxiety sometimes. When we do this stuff to ourselves, we hold it in and never release the pressure, then conditions form. Things happen to us that are unpleasant. It can turn into depression. It can turn into anxiety. It can turn into lashing out. It can turn into other destructive behavior. It can turn into addictive behavior. All of this pressure that we hold in throughout our lives, that if we don't release it, it becomes or manifests into something else. So when you know someone who has in their past been emotionally abused, or they've gone through any type of abuse, and they've not dealt with it, they've not healed from it, they still carry around negative feelings about it, they have PTSD about it, then you may have behaviors that this person is describing. Suddenly she becomes abusive and now he has to deal with it. This is something that needs to be looked at. So that's my first thing, is that maybe she needs to talk to someone. You probably already know this. That's just my generic personal growth advice 101. Talk to somebody. Let it out. Release the pressure. So there's that. If that hasn't happened, it's going to be a lot harder for you, because you may be there trying to help, but often the romantic partner can't help. Not all the time. There are some romantic partners that are very good at this, and they know how to do it. They just can't take anything personally. And good luck with that. Good luck trying not to take anything personally from someone who's experiencing PTSD and becoming abusive towards you, because you are in the relationship. The relationship is affected. You are affected. So when someone starts behaving badly, for lack of a better term, you need to understand that that behavior is not about you. You are directly affected. You are the target. You will be called by name as the person doing it, being the problem. But it has nothing to do with you, because their behavior started before you. Their behavior started before you got into that relationship. That behavior didn't form because of you. That behavior was there before. It is their survival mechanisms, their coping mechanisms. Whatever they need to do to feel comfortable and in control in their lives is what they're going to do. Not about you at all, even though it feels like the entire thing is about you. But that's because you take it personally. It's hard not to. I'm not saying that it's easy to not take it personally. I'm saying that when you are, let's just say, a therapist or a counselor or any professional in that field, they're not personally connected to that person. They're not in the relationship. So any type of bad behavior that comes out of that person while talking to this professional, the professional's not going to be affected. I'm not saying they don't get affected. A lot of professionals I know get affected. It can be hard being a people helper of any sort. Like myself, I'm a behavior and relationship coach. I have worked with people that have certainly shown some behaviors that were harder to deal with than other behaviors. But I also know it's not directed at me. And I can do that because I am not in their life in that way, where you are. So if you are a partner or a friend or a family member of someone who's abusive towards you, and you can accept that their behavior isn't about you, even though it's directed at you, even though they blame you, even though they point right at you and call you by name and other names, then you have achieved enlightenment. I don't mean to make a joke of it. I know this is hard, but I'm saying this because it's hard. I'm saying that when you're in a relationship of any sort and you want to be the person that helps the person abusing you or acting badly toward you, it is extremely difficult. This is why it's often not recommended that you become your romantic partner's coach or therapist. It's not recommended unless you're that special type of enlightened person that cannot be affected by behavior that directly involves you. It's like the employee and the boss. The employee and the boss typically don't have an intimate relationship or a close enough connection where if the boss gets angry, the employee doesn't have to get personally involved in that anger or personally affected by that anger. They do. When I was an employee, I sometimes got personally affected by my boss's anger, but we don't have to. As an employee, you don't have to be affected by their anger. There's something that's angering them, and yes, you may be what they consider the reason for your anger, or maybe not, but it's still behavior that they developed before they even knew you, before you even existed in their lives. So we have to make sure that we understand that all emotionally abusive or any abusive behavior was learned way before you. And if you can tell me a story that's different than that, I want to hear it, because that would be very odd and very unique. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying that you might know someone that experienced brain damage and then their behavior changed, or they just went through some major emotional trauma themselves during the relationship and then they changed. That is definitely possible. But I'm really not talking about that type of behavior. I'm talking about behavior that was learned from childhood. And that is something that they developed way before you. So this is a place that you can choose to accept that it's not about you, even though it might be impossible. I admit it might be impossible to do that because you are directly affected. That would be like me saying, hey, somebody broke into your house and stole all your money and jewelry and burned down your house when they left. And then I tell you that their behavior, their actions weren't about you. It was about their upbringing. And you're going to look at that charred mess on the ground, knowing that was your house, knowing that all your possessions are gone, and you're going to punch me in the face. You're going to be very upset with me if I said it wasn't about you, and you shouldn't take this personally. You'll be upset because it affected you directly. That's where it gets tricky, because when you are directly affected, you are a part of the abuse cycle. You are a part of the dysfunction. And when you're a part of it, you are affected by it, which makes you probably not the best person to be that person's therapist or coach. So it comes back to that, where if you believe you can be totally disconnected and detached from their behaviors and not take anything personally and still love them, even though they're doing behaviors that affect you, then you are a bigger person than I am. Because even though I know everything I know, whenever there's some sort of conflict that I've not experienced yet in my relationship, or even ones that I have experienced, but they just come out of the blue, I'm still affected. It takes a lot of willpower and mental strength to step out of any type of heated argument or I'm right, no, I'm right kind of conversation or whatever. It takes a lot for either one of us to step out of that, because once you're going down that path, it's hard to pull back. And so I try to stay conscientious of this in my life. And when you aren't doing what I do all day, every day, coaching people, talking about emotional abuse and working on tools to empower yourself, it might even be harder. So give yourself a break if you aren't able to handle everything that comes your way, because even the most educated people with more education than I can ever dream of are still affected emotionally, and it causes a real challenge in their life. So give yourself a break if you feel like you should be able to handle this stuff, because a lot of people can't. And handle's the wrong word, but be able to work through it and get through it without being affected. That is a challenge. That is a major emotional challenge to overcome, no matter who you are. So just be easy on yourself if that ever happens. And that's the second part of this person's message, or the second sentence, where he says, the person I care for deeply was emotionally abused as a child, and I'm trying to learn how to support and understand her. You may never be able to understand her. Let me let you off the hook with this one. If you're trying to understand her, you may never. I've been with my girlfriend for 6 years, and there are some things that she does that I still don't understand. I do try, and I ask her lots of questions, but it still doesn't make sense, some of these behaviors. And she's wonderful. I'm not putting her down. She is great. But I'm saying that you will never understand someone else's behaviors because they have the breadth of their experience behind them, and you don't have their experience. They have the breadth of their traumas, their challenges, their wins, their losses. They have everything behind them, all the experience that they've gone through, and they are the summation of every single thing that has happened to them and every decision that they have made and every coping mechanism that they have created. And you will never understand it all. I will never understand it all because we are our own people. We are our own individuals with our own experience in life, and no one has our brain, and no one has access to our brain. They try to control our brain, but they don't have access to it. That is the last place of total freedom, and that is a wild, wild west of thoughts, feelings, and emotions. So everyone has a different experience. I don't think I need to explain that too much. I think this is very obvious, but it is important to understand that you won't understand. It's important to acknowledge that you'll never figure someone else out. So I'm just letting you off the hook that if you're trying to learn how to understand her, you can't. You won't be able to do it. You might be able to understand some stuff because you'll have really good conversations, but you still will not be able to get into the deepest layers that are way under there that she herself may not be able to understand because maybe she hasn't uncovered them. I mean, once we understand our own layers, it's a lot easier to heal. And I know there are people out there saying, well, I understand my layers, but I'm not healing. That's because there's usually something else underneath that. There's usually something more that needs to be opened up or broken apart to understand that. And you don't even have to understand what's going on inside yourself to heal. In fact, I was telling a client the other day that when you work on yourself today and catch your own behaviors and change your own behaviors and show up differently, you can start to heal the past. Meaning any trauma that's left over from childhood or any time in the past can start to heal because you're changing your traumatic responses into empowered responses. Oh, I remember where I talked about this. In fact, I wanted to tell you, just going to take a quick moment to tell you this. Go to loveandabuse.com/chat1. That's CHAT, the word chat, and the number 1. loveandabuse.com/chat1. And you'll be directed to a YouTube video where I was in a conversation with Dwayne, who owns the YouTube channel Dad Surviving Divorce. He was married to a covert narcissist for 20 years, and he had me on his show, and this subject came up. So it's about an hour-long interview. I think if you're listening to this show, you'll get a lot of value from that interview. And of course, Dwayne is one of the resources that I recommend in the Mean Workbook, and he also contributed to the Mean Workbook. So I highly recommend him as a resource for you if you want to learn more about narcissistic behavior, especially covert narcissism. He has a wealth of information over there. Head over to loveandabuse.com/chat1, and that'll send you right over to the YouTube video, and then you can subscribe to his channel if you want. I brought that up because I remember talking about this very concept of reverse engineering the process of healing. Instead of trying to bring up the past and heal from that past by expressing it and talking about it with a professional, you actually do behaviors today that are no longer attached to the trauma from before. What that means is, like Dwayne mentioned in the conversation, he used to shut down. When his wife would say something and he just felt like he couldn't say anything, he would shut down, be quiet, and walk away. So Dwayne said he used to respond that way with his mom. His mom would say something or do something, and Dwayne would shut down. And this was his response. He realized this was his trauma response. And he was still doing this as an adult in his marriage. So Dwayne and I talked about that for a little bit. But what I said was, as soon as you start recognizing this behavior in yourself and you decide to change the response, which takes time, and I talk about that more in the conversation, so check it out. But as soon as you decide to change that response, I told Dwayne, instead of shutting down, you would recognize that you want to shut down and decide to do something else instead. And when you decide to do something else and you actually do it, you start to reverse the trauma and start to heal those childhood wounds instead of having to bring up childhood and talk about them. Some people may or may not recommend that. I mean, if you're with a therapist and they want to talk about your childhood, absolutely, go for it. But I've noticed that when we actually change the behavior that originates from trauma, we're able to start healing that trauma because we start feeling better about ourselves. We increase our self-worth and our self-esteem. We increase our levels of confidence, and we increase our level of trust in ourselves. And all of this starts to build where suddenly the trauma from the past doesn't apply anymore because we're not acting from that place of trauma. So that's what I mean about reverse engineering. It's probably not the best term, but I use it when it comes to trying to heal childhood wounds. We don't always have to go into childhood. That's my opinion. I don't believe we always have to do that. It can be helpful. I've done it. I've talked with that inner child. I've visited with him, and every now and then I might visit again to ask him how he's doing. It can be helpful to make sure he's okay. But my point on this is that if you're experiencing any type of dysfunction in yourself, or you're doing any type of toxic behavior, or having a response to somebody else's toxic behavior, let's make sure that our response is empowered and not coming from a place of dysfunction. And the main difference between those two is that the empowered response is the one that we do regardless of the consequences, and the dysfunctional response is the one that we always do because we're in fear. And the fear usually comes from old trauma. It's not always trauma, but you get what I mean. It's like if you are acting from a place of fear of the consequences, then you're more likely to do something that protects you. And an empowered response would be the real response that you want to have or you want to do, and then you choose to do it. There's the difference right there. I mean, I was facing my stepfather one day at the front door of my mom's house, and he was not invited. He just showed up out of the blue, and he has been a very bad person for a lot of years for my mom, and they finally separated, and I don't know if they got the divorce at that time yet, but he showed up while I was at my mom's house, and this was an opportunity to face him with an empowered response or choose a fear-based trauma response. And for the first time in my life, I chose the empowered response. He wanted to come in, and my child self said, "Oh, you better let him in because you'll cause trouble otherwise." That's exactly what my fear told me to do. But the empowered response was to say, "Sorry, you're not allowed in." And I chose to take that step and use the empowered response. And I knew that I was going to get punched in the face. I tell this story in the video too. I knew I was going to get punched in the face. And when I said, "I'm sorry, you're not allowed in," he just shrugged his shoulders and left. And my reality wasn't real. My reality was he was going to hurt me. And he didn't. I mean, he never punched me in the face before, so I made up this reality. It was a complete fantasy. And I believed it was going to come true. So I never chose to act differently. But that day I did. I wanted to be empowered. I wanted my trauma responses to go away. I didn't want to behave from a place of trauma anymore. So that day I chose not to. And it changed my life. I mean, ever since then, I've been able to hold my own, I guess, and stand up for myself. And it was powerful. That's one of those moments where you pick your battles wisely, because if you're not prepared for something that you believe may happen, and it happens, what's next? I chose to prepare for a physical assault, and it didn't happen. And I chose to do that because my integrity and my character were more important than anything else that could happen in that moment. So even if he punched me in the face, at least I stood up for myself. I am not giving you this advice. I'm not telling you this is what you need to do. If you believe you're going to be physically harmed, don't do this. Don't listen to me. But I'm just saying, if you want to stop responding from a victim place or from childhood trauma or from fear, you have to change that response and come from a more empowered place. And I said it on the video, and I've said this before, in order to find the empowered response, you ask yourself the question, what would I do or say if I had absolutely no fear of the consequences? The answer you get is the empowered response. And what you choose from that point on will determine what happens next. And that's where it might be a big decision for you. So anyway, let me come back to this person's letter. He said, "Sometimes it seems like I am doing everything wrong, and then I realize I am triggering something that makes her think that I am becoming the abuser." Yes, you probably do feel like you are becoming the abuser, because that is often what happens. And sometimes it is unavoidable. I mean, it's always avoidable. Yes, you could walk away, but in a relationship, it is very hard to avoid doing abusive behavior back. Because what ends up happening is that you try the right way, you try the kind way, you try the supportive and caring way, and it doesn't work, and all you get is their bad behavior back, and you just don't know what else to do, so you maybe lash out or you lose it, and then you start even manipulating back or trying to control them just because you want to be treated kindly. This happens, and this is another area where you have to give yourself a break. If you spot this behavior in you, don't think that you're becoming abusive. Don't think that you are becoming a bad person. Look at that as a fight or flight reaction to behavior that you just can't take anymore. This is what happens. You try and try and try to do what you think is right and what you think is loving and caring. And if you get abuse in return, you're going to do behavior that you may not like in yourself. And that is only because you want to be loved too. You want to be cared about. You want to be supported. And how else can you get it? If you tried all the kind, nice, caring, and generous, supportive things, and those aren't working, how else can you get it? This is where we go sometimes. We have to reach further, maybe into the darker part of our toolbox, and pull out these tools that at least give us some semblance of feeling loved, cared about, supported, even liked. You just want to be liked sometimes. And when you don't get that feeling, you do have to sometimes reach into that darker part of the toolbox. I'm not saying that you should do this. I'm just saying it happens. This is what happens when you're in an abusive relationship and you can't get your needs met. You're going to find other ways to get them, because a human being can only go so long without feeling a connection from someone that they are trying to connect to. We can only go so long without feeling love. We can only go so long. It's just, we need it. We have to know that we are lovable. We have to know that someone cares about us. And when you're in a romantic relationship, we have to know that our partner still likes us, let alone loves us, and we seek ways to find out if that's true. So this is the darker part of the toolbox, and don't be too hard on yourself if you've reached that far in your toolbox and started using this stuff, because we're all capable of doing it, and it's just something that happens when you've tried everything else. So like I said, be easy on yourself, but also know that this is why it happens. Usually someone's tried everything and they can't get what they need themselves, so they will try harder using different means. Now, it doesn't mean it should continue. Once you catch that in yourself, it should be acknowledged. Whoa, what did I just do? I just lied. I just lied to them so that I could feel better about myself. Or I just lied to them to get some sort of need met. Or I lied to them so that they would treat the kids better. You know, you're going to find yourself doing these behaviors, and you're going to not like a lot of these behaviors if you're doing these behaviors. And so you need to acknowledge it. That's what I did. You know what? I did that. I don't like it. If that's what you're feeling and thinking, I don't like it. I don't want to do that again. So what do I need to do now? Now, this is where we get into the heart of this person's letter. He says that I realize I am triggering something that makes her think I am becoming the abuser. Yes, you are likely triggering something. It's not about you, but yes, she is being triggered. You are a stimulus for whatever response she is giving. So something you're doing is a trigger for her, even if you are being kind and nice. This is where we take the blame off ourselves, because even when you're being kind and nice, it can still be triggering for them. That doesn't mean it's about you. Again, I'm just reiterating that so that you don't take it to heart and take it personally, even though it's almost impossible. But maybe these words will ring in your brain during the heat of the argument, and you can step outside yourself and not be affected. Or even if that affect decreases 1%, then maybe you'll get through the situation a little bit more unscathed. But yes, this person says that he is probably triggering her, and you will. Anything you do can be a trigger, but it's not what you're doing unless it's what you're doing. And a lot of it has to do with intent. So let me explain that. If you are doing something intentionally to control or change or even hurt this person, then yes, she's going to be triggered. It'll probably be justifiable. That's when it is about you. If you are doing anything to control, change, or hurt the other person, then it is about you. It comes right back to you because your intent is there. Even if you don't believe you're intending to do that, you have to ask yourself, am I doing or saying something in an effort to control or change the other person? If you can ask yourself that question and say, absolutely not. I care about them. I want them to live their own life and be their own person and follow their own path to happiness. If you can answer it that way, then it's not about you, because your intentions will probably be sound and noble, and you want them to be happy, so you're not going to interfere with their path to happiness. But if you ask yourself, well, I want them to change, so I'm going to do this behavior or say this thing in hopes that they'll change, now you're doing what we talked about earlier. You're reaching into the darker part of your toolbox to pull out some other tools that could be manipulative or controlling. So there's a fine line there. We have to be very careful. Even though they may be treating you badly, if you want to change them, then your focus is in the wrong place. Your focus needs to be, what do I need to do for myself so that I am not hurt, so that I am with somebody that loves me, so that I am with somebody that cares about me and cares about my happiness? What do I need to do for me? Because if it's not that person, then what do I need to do to be with a person like that or not be with a person who's not like that? Yeah, that could involve you being away from that person, because otherwise your intent is to change that person. Somebody might say, well, my intent is to heal that person or help them fix themselves or help them get into a better space inside their head. My only response to that is, if they're asking you to do that, then by all means, jump right in. If they haven't asked you to do that, then doing it, you become a manipulative and controlling person. It may not be like they are, but if you want to fix someone or change someone, you become a manipulative and controlling person. This is a gray area because we want people to heal. We want people to stop doing bad behavior. We want people to love us and just be friendly toward us, just treat us with kindness and respect. But when they don't, then we want them to change. But if our intent is to change them, we end up doing many similar behaviors. And this is where it comes into that darker part of the toolbox. We reach in and do the manipulations, and we lie and we deceive, and our focus is on them and what they need to do to change instead of on us and what we need to do to protect ourselves and make sure that our boundaries aren't violated, our values aren't violated, and that we are taking steps that we need to take for us. At the same time, loving them in their space. But if they start to invade our space, now we need to focus on ourselves and what we need to do for us. So what I just said there sounds like, okay, just get away. It could be that. Or it could be you telling them, look, if you treat me like that ever again, I'm not going to stick around. This is where accountability comes in. If you treat me like that ever again, I'm out of here. Easy to say, hard to follow through on. But it should be absolute. I mean, if you're going to say something like that, be ready to follow through, because you can't use that more than once and have it work the second time. You might be able to, it could be a threat, but believe me, if you're with an abusive person and you say something like, well, I'm not going to take that behavior anymore. If you do that again, I'm leaving. And then they do it again and you don't leave, you already know what I'm going to say. They're not going to believe you the next time. And that gives them permission to continue behaving badly. So if you've never heard me say that, or you don't understand that concept, rewind and listen again, because that is an important concept. Accountability is key. If you're going to say something, you better mean it and you better follow through with it. Otherwise, don't say it. Don't say it until you're ready, because then it'll be effective. And the emotionally abusive person really doesn't like accountability. Accountability means they do have to change something about themselves in order for you to stick around. And that is very difficult for them, for a lot of them. And it will be life-changing for them if they do it. So you're not asking them to change, but you're saying, if you want me to stay, you're going to have to change. But you don't say those words. You say the words that honor you. If you do that to me again, I won't be around anymore. I'm not saying you have to use those exact words, but you get the sentiment. I'm almost done. Let me get back to this letter. His main question is this. I'm looking for information on identifying the behavioral patterns of someone that's been emotionally abused. And sometimes it feels like I'm doing the wrong thing, and then I'm triggering something in her. So I quickly retreat from these situations, and I'm also aware that she can become the abuser, and that I am changing myself to fix her situation. So changing yourself, yes, you're going to diminish yourself when you start to change who you are around the abusive person. So I just want you to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I say that knowing it happens all the time. I say that knowing that most people that listen to this show have diminished themselves. They have changed themselves. They have lost a big part of themselves. If that's you, you need to find it. You need to get it back. And, that is a journey. I understand. That is healing. I understand. But it's still in there. You are still in there. Believe me. If you weren't in there, you wouldn't be listening to this right now, because you wouldn't care. You would be totally numb. If you've been abused to the point where you don't listen to things like this, then maybe that person isn't there. But you are there, because you are here listening to stuff like this. You are looking for information to help you through a situation, or just to reflect on what's going on in your life, which means that the person that you feel really good about, that you really loved being, is still in there. And maybe you feel that now. Maybe you love this person that you are now, and you're just listening to this for other reasons. But if you don't feel that, know that you are still in there. You will come out again. This is the most important thing to think about. And the person who wrote to me, I don't want you to change yourself. In fact, the advice I'm going to give you, this is where I finally answer your letter. The advice I want to give you is to remember that when behavior comes your way that you don't like, it is important for you to let her know that you don't like being treated that way. That might not feel good when I say that. You might already say something like that to her, like, hey, don't treat me that way. But in order for her to change, she has to access empathy. She has to access an understanding that her behavior hurts you. Now, I understand that she was emotionally abused as a child. There is a sympathy that I have for her. I get that. And we can have sympathy for the abusers that have been abused. Absolutely. But do we have to allow that abuse to continue from her past into your present? No, you do not have to allow that. And I know you love her and you want to work things out. And you can if she is able to understand that when she behaves this way, it hurts you, and you say that you will not be able to accept that behavior. What does that mean? That means that she needs to be self-aware, and she also needs to be conscientious that her behaviors have a direct effect on her relationship. And you didn't really share with me if she is conscientious of her own behavior. You just said that she was abused as a child, and now she is being emotionally abusive toward you. So what that tells me is that your responses to her behavior are going to make all the difference if you're going to continue receiving more bad behavior from her. So what does that mean? That means if you really love her and want to save this relationship, you're going to have to let her know that her behavior hurts you to the point that makes you want to leave. I was intimating this earlier, and I'm not saying that you have to do this. I'm just saying that in order for behavior to stop, that won't stop, that where you've tried everything, you might have to get to that point of accountability where you say, if you don't stop, I can't be here. And you can say, I love you and I want to stay, but you keep treating me badly. Now she might say, well, I don't want you to leave. I really love you and I don't mean to do this, but I'm triggered from my past. Then you might say, I don't want to leave either. I really love you too. I want to work this out, but I can't take this behavior. I don't want it anymore. Unless that changes, I'm not saying unless she changes, you're just saying unless that behavior changes, I don't want to be hurt anymore. So I'm not saying you should say this. I'm not saying you should do this. I'm saying that if you want things to change, you have to give an empowered response. A disempowered response might be you changing, you lashing out, you defending yourself, you explaining yourself, you explaining things to her, whatever responses you had before. They probably weren't empowered to the point where you say, look, I can't take this anymore, so you have to stop this. You have to stop this. It's not healthy for either of us. You have to stop this behavior. What if that leads to a breakup? What if she says, get out? That might be her initial response. What if she says, please don't leave me, I'm sick, I need help? Then it sounds like she might be asking for help. And at that point, maybe it won't be you, but maybe you can talk about therapy. Maybe you can talk about her talking to a professional or whatever. The whole point is when someone's being abusive faces a real consequence, that's when the golden opportunity for change comes in. The abuser that faces a real consequence has an opportunity to make a change that could be life-changing. And so when they face the consequence that there could be the end of a relationship, it finally breaks them out of this abusive trance that they've been in, this control and this manipulation, and they finally get it. They finally realize, whoa, so my behavior is that bad. Now, I've said this before, but abusers often don't know how bad their behavior is until they realize they're going to lose you. I've seen this over and over again. The abusive person finally gets past their own blocks when they face a real consequence that you could be gone from their life. That's when things can shift. This is why you have to be serious. If you don't want to be abused anymore and you've tried everything, you've tried being nicer, you've tried talking things out, and none of it works, then you have to focus on yourself and what you need to do for you so that you're not exposed to this bad behavior anymore, and it lets them know that you won't tolerate it. I won't tolerate it anymore. Yeah, Paul, but she's been abused. She needs healing. And sometimes that healing never comes until they face a consequence that's real. I remember this is how it was in my marriage. I finally got the point when my wife said, I don't want to be married to you anymore. It floored me. I didn't even understand the depth of the way I was treating my wife back then. I was highly judgmental and critical of her, and I really thought I was working on myself, but it didn't hit me for real until she said she was leaving. And then I realized, oh, she was serious this whole time. I mean, I sound like an idiot when I say it now, but that's what happened. I was married that whole time, and I knew she was unhappy, and I knew she was sad, and everything that I was doing, I believed I was right. And even when we went to couples counseling ourselves, I still believed I was right. It didn't matter what anybody else said. And the only thing that mattered was when I finally faced the reality that she didn't want to be married anymore, and it took me out of that abusive trance that I was in and shook my foundation so much that it made me change who I was. It made me finally realize that my behavior was harmful. I didn't realize my behavior was harmful. I just thought I was right, and that's all that mattered. But it was harmful. And the only way I realized I was causing harm was when she wanted to leave. That's what started my healing process. So I am so grateful she did that for me. But this may not be for you. I'm not saying that you need to leave. I'm not saying that you need to give her an ultimatum. I'm saying that if you've tried everything and nothing seems to work, this is the only thing I've seen work, is when you give them a consequence which gives them a fear of loss. A fear of loss will shake anyone's foundation. And if she really cares about you, she's not going to like losing you. She doesn't want to lose you. And you don't have to say, I'm out of here. You can just say, look, I don't want to be treated that way anymore, so please stop. I mean, that could be what you say. I don't want to be treated that way anymore. Please stop. It doesn't mean you don't care about her being abused in her past. That's not it at all. But all you have to deal with right now is her behavior today. Because remember what I said, healing from your past can happen today by changing the behaviors that you do today. So if she chooses to change the way she behaves and the way she treats you today, that past can start healing, because what's going to happen is she's going to start getting better results. She's going to start feeling more connected to you and more loving toward you, because she's finally doing behaviors that precipitate love and connection. She's finally doing behaviors that enhance and amplify intimacy. But the abuser will find it very difficult to get to that place if they have no fear of losing you. That has been my experience. I'm not saying it's yours, but I have seen this over and over and over again. People write to me and they say, look, I've tried everything. He sees me crying. She sees me upset. He sees me hurt and depressed, and she sees me getting angry, and it still doesn't change how they behave toward me. I don't know what else to do. If you're in that space of, I don't know what else to do, I've tried everything, this is the next big step. You have to introduce a fear of loss. You have to let them know that their behavior does have consequences. This won't work all the time. This won't work with certain people. Sometimes you'll do that and the abusive person will say, fine, get out of here, and they'll never talk to you again. But what kind of relationship was it, and how much did they really care about you and love you if they are ready to just hang up the towel as soon as you say, I don't want to be hurt anymore? If that is their response, then there wasn't much that was being held together anyway. There wasn't much going on there in the first place. So coming back to this letter, just to give you my final words on it, how do you identify behavioral patterns of someone that's been abused? Well, you know she's been abused. My advice is to stay focused on how you're treated, because regardless of her behavior patterns, you need to focus on how it makes you feel and how you're being treated. This answer may not satisfy you. I get it. I know you're looking for something deeper. You're probably looking for a checklist. Okay, A, when she does this, she is feeling X. When she does this, she is feeling Y, or she is experiencing post-traumatic stress. You know, I can't give you that, but all I can give you is you check in with yourself and you ask yourself, do I like being treated this way? If the answer is no, that behavior needs to be addressed. That behavior needs to change. So even if you were to identify behaviors in her that led to a trigger, by identifying what behaviors are coming at you and how it affects you, and letting her know how it affects you, you give her an opportunity to change those behaviors herself. If you say, this hurts me when you do that. When you do this behavior, it really feels like you don't love me. You know, something like that, something along those lines. Or it feels like you are intentionally hurting me, like you don't care if I'm hurt. You could even say something like that. If you say that to an abusive person and they don't care enough to change that behavior toward you, even when they know they're doing it, then the focus needs to go back on you. I'm not going to rub that point in anymore because I think I've pressed some buttons in this episode today. I know that there might be some people fearing that the only thing left to do is to say, look, if you don't stop, I'm out of here. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just giving you the hard truth that sometimes when behavior doesn't change, regardless of their history, that the focus needs to be back on you and what you need to do for yourself, because self-love has to come first. It has to. Self-love has to come before you can give any love to anyone else, because if you don't love yourself first and take care of yourself, you're not going to have much left to give to anyone else. And I want you to have a lot to give to anyone else that you choose to give it to. I want to thank this person for writing, and I am so sorry if I did not give you exactly what you're looking for, but I hope this episode has been helpful and valuable to you or anyone listening. Thank you for tuning in, and share this with others that might benefit. Love and Abuse is the official podcast of the MEAN Workbook, an assessment and healing guide for difficult relationships. The workbook provides an evaluation of your relationship based on a 200-point assessment. It is geared toward romantic relationships, but many have used it to determine if family or others in their life are being manipulative or emotionally abusive as well. If you're in a difficult relationship and would like to pinpoint the unhealthy behaviors causing you to leave so many interactions feeling bad, let the workbook help you discover the specific components of bad behavior and put into words what you're experiencing. Get the tools you need to help you reach clarity. Visit loveandabuse.com for more information. This show exists to remind you that you are not alone and you are not going crazy. You deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. You deserve honesty and sincerity. You deserve to be treated as worthy and significant, because you are. Thanks again for joining me. We'll talk again soon.